G'day and welcome to the first ever episode of Inside the Spa Business. My name's Trent Munday and the aim with the show is really pretty simple. Each week I'll be bringing you information, insights and advice on a whole range of topics really, but anything in and around and related to the spa and wellness business. And I really do appreciate you tuning in, taking the time. I'd appreciate it even more if you decided to subscribe so that you could follow and keep updated with each new episode. And look, I'd really love it if you decided to go on over and at some stage give us a rating and a comment in the iTunes store. But look, all that's probably a little bit premature. Maybe we should get on with the show first so you can decide if there's anything worth listening to here or not. And before I get started, I also just want to give a quick shout out to Mick and Carly Simmons over at Spa Sounds. They're our music sponsor for the show, so they'll be providing the background tracks, the music that you hear throughout each episode. Relaxing, soothing sounds just like that is what you can expect from the guys over at Spa Sounds. And they've got really all your spa music needs covered, whether it's a single digital download or a fully customized album or collection based on your own brand, to suit your brand. So head on over, check them out, spasounds.com.au. Tell them Trent sent you and I know they'll take good care of you. In today's episode, our first ever episode, I thought a good place to start would be with the definition of spa, what it means in different parts of the world. Because even though it's a word that seems to have become part of our lexicon, really, it does tend to still mean different things in different parts of the world. So we'll have a look at maybe the history of the word, where it's come from, what it means in different parts of the world, what it's going to mean in the context of this show here at least, and also we'll touch on this concept of wellness, which seems to be the flavour of the month that everybody's talking about. So without any further ado, as they say, let's get stuck into the show. Now, a logical and simple enough place to start any discussion about the history of spas would be with the definition of the word, right? Well, so you would think. You see, as it turns out, the word spa can mean different things to different people in different parts of the world. In Europe, for example, the word spa traditionally has been used to identify a mineral spring. And understandably, the Americans seem to have adopted this definition and the application of the word in the early years of their nation too. But today, however, in the United States, the term spa generally refers to a place, usually either in a hotel or resort or maybe a standalone facility, where people go to get non-medical services that promote health, relaxation and wellness. In Australia, many people using the word spa would be referring to a hot tub or a jacuzzi. And this particular definition always brings a bit of a smile to my face because it reminds me of a time when I was travelling. I met a guy in the lobby bar of the hotel where I was staying. Now, you'd call this guy a typical Aussie, right? A blokey bloke, a fella's fella, a man's man. And when I mentioned I was in the spa business, he sort of gave me that nod and he said, "Oh yeah, I know spas, mate. Yeah, we just put a spa on me mum's back deck, mate. She loves it." Now, of course, what he was really talking about was what we'd think about as a hot tub or a jacuzzi. So for the purposes of our discussion here, we're going to stick with that US definition. A place for non-medical services to promote health, relaxation and wellness. As to the history of the word spa and where it first came from, that too is something the spa industry just can't seem to agree on. A lot of purists will tell you that the word spa is taken from the name of a Belgian town, which was home to numerous mineral springs. Others will tell you that spa is an acronym for the Latin phrase salus per aqua, meaning health through water. And given the roots of the Latin language are said to date back to around the 700s BC, and the Romans of course were famous for their bathing activities, it might be reasonable to assume that this is the correct history of the word. Comparatively, the Belgian town of Spa didn't come to be until the 14th century AD. But when you consider that the word spa itself doesn't appear to have been used anywhere until, around the late 1900s, I think we've got to accept that maybe salus per aqua is really more of a backronym than an acronym. One of those acronyms we kind of make up after the event. And whatever the history of the word, the one thing that we can all seem to agree on is that health is a key element of the story. And it's worth noting that by accepting the definition of spa as a place to go for non-medical treatments to enhance your health, relaxation and wellness, we're effectively removing a commonly held qualification standard that to be called a spa, any facility really has to include some kind of water component. We'll have a look at the issues around classification and regulation in the industry later on, But suffice to say that this demand that a real spa has got to include a water component, it's taken up a lot of space at many an industry event over the years. And no matter what side of history you land on when it comes to the origins of the word, it could easily be argued that water is a key element of it, be it for bathing or cleansing or just for consumption for your health. So in that sense, this passionate cry for water isn't totally without reason. But what has been interesting, and if I was being completely honest, it's been more than a little amusing to me. It's watching how the debates around this issue and a small handful of other issues have tended to unite what is otherwise a fairly disparate community. I mean, if this unification was the result of a desire to find a new common cause or a set of beliefs that we can all rally around, that'd be great. But what troubles me, though, is that it seems that it's not so much a case of a shared vision, but really more about bullhorn diplomacy. Those with the loudest voice have declared it, they must be right, so let's all get on board. Now, fast forward to the early 2000s, and it seemed that the question of what we're going to call ourselves still hasn't been resolved. The most important discussions around the spa industry at that time were about whether we should be calling ourselves spa or wellness. And I remember very clearly sitting in a conference room in Bali at an event that attracted key industry influencers and decision makers from Asia and beyond. And the room seemed to be evenly split between those that said we needed to be spa and those in favour of using the term wellness. And I got to say, my thinking at the time was rather than trying to create a new brand, that being wellness, wouldn't we just be better off expanding and refining the scope of the brand that we already have, which is spa? I mean, building a collection of perceptions in the mind of the consumer, right, which is really what branding is, that takes a lot of time and effort and often money and resource. And sure, there might be some confusion out there as to exactly what a spa is, like for instance, does it include a water facility or not? But at least most people have a basic understanding of what they're going to find when they go to a spa. Now, not only did the merchants of change want us to abandon this term spa, but they also wanted us to get behind a term, which was wellness, that to the average consumer sounds pretty generic and, maybe just a bit too fluffy. And the fluff factor has long been a limiting factor in the spa industry gaining acceptance and credibility to Joe Public. Today we want to try and sell them a whole new concept, and we're going to sell them wellness. And just when it looked like the great battle of spa versus wellness was going to rage on for years, there seemed to be a truce. Almost overnight, it seemed that we'd just become the wellness industry, and that was that. And I don't recall witnessing any formal declaration that the war was over. But of course, then again, we never really had a declaration of war in the first place either. All those loud voices who had so passionately spruiked the virtues of brand spa, they simply went quiet. Now, it could be that this was a genuine moment of agreement between the factions for the greater good of the industry. Unfortunately, though, I kind of think it's another one of those megaphone moments. Bullhorn diplomacy had triumphed again. The most fascinating observation about this new brand called wellness is that consumers, by and large, they still refer to us as spa. You don't hear many people saying today, I'm off to the wellness shop for a massage. Even if the name of the place is actually called the wellness shop. More often than not, when people are talking to their friends, they're just going to call it the spa because that's what people understand. And maybe what we've really done in focusing on this new brand called wellness is to just create a higher and more exclusive brand of spa. And whilst Mr. Average Joe may not have any friends that really understand what a wellness centre is, you can guarantee Mrs. High Society Jane probably does. And even if they don't, they'll see it as something new and interesting, and in the never-ending battle to keep up with Mrs. High Society, her friends are just going to nod their head in acknowledgement, and as soon as she's out of sight, they'll pop off to the nearest exclusive spa they can find that carries the brand of wellness, and they're just going to dive right in. Now, the Global Wellness Institute, under whose auspices the Global Wellness Summit operates, it's unquestionably, as the moniker would imply, the leading body in the world when it comes to wellness. And the annual summit events and numerous research papers produced by the Global Wellness Institute are the only real voice when it comes to this industry at a global level. And this organisation has, in a relatively short time, become the voice of wellness. They effectively own the term wellness, at least from an industry insider perspective. And maybe that was the point all along. I mean, spa was a term that had been around for too long and had become so fragmented that to control that word in any meaningful way would be a bit too difficult. I mean, it had come to mean different things to different groups of people, and so it could never really establish itself as an encapsulating word of our industry. Wellness, on the other hand, despite being a fairly broad-reaching term, wasn't really owned by anybody. It was ripe for the picking. And thus, we've taken the term wellness to define our industry, and in the process, we've relegated spa to be the term for a much smaller sub-segment of the wellness industry. Now, interestingly, when you read the history of wellness as published by the Global Wellness Institute, the word spa doesn't even appear once. Even though they begin the story way back in 3000 BC with the ancient roots of Ayurveda and run right through to today, still no mention of spa. And to add an element of irony, the summit, which was first held in 2007, began life as the Global Spa Summit. Then in 2012 it became the Global Spa and Wellness Summit, eventually becoming the Global Wellness Summit in 2015. And we, the industry, seem to have just gone along with this push towards wellness, whether our customers really get it or not. And I'm not necessarily saying that the outcome is taking us in the wrong direction either. My point is that where once there seemed to be a robust discussion, regardless of the real relevance of the debate, today there just seems to be quiet obedience. Did we all somehow reach a point of consensus, or did we simply yield to the dais? As it stands today, according to the 2017 Global Wellness Economy Monitor, published by Global Wellness Institute, the spa industry is the third smallest segment of the overall wellness industry, representing around 3% of the total wellness economy, which is apparently valued at around $3.7 trillion US. And that in itself makes the spa industry worth almost $100 billion today. But imagine how that value could grow if we were able to, as Professor Jerry Bodecker, a good friend of mine, suggested, become the organisational face of wellness. And we will explore that concept, that of spas as the organisational face of wellness, in a later episode, so do tune in if you'd like to learn more. Okay, so I hope that gives you a little bit of colour on what we mean when we talk about spa, at least in the context of this show anyway. And love to hear any thoughts you might have. If you want to head on over to iTunes and leave a comment, I will reply to any and all comments. And maybe you disagree with what I said. Maybe you've got another view. And that's okay, I'd love to hear it. You're entitled to be wrong. No, in all seriousness, love to have a discussion about it. That's what this whole show is really all about. I'll also publish the show notes over at trentmunday.com if there's any useful links or resources that I think might be relevant to today's conversations as well. And in the next episode, in fact over the next few episodes, we'll be having a look at the evolution of the different types of spas. We'll start off with a look at the evolution of day spas. So look forward to having you back for that episode. Thanks again for your time, and bye for now. And thanks Spa Sounds for the music.